definitely going to go next year. It was just so great to watch everyone get closer to God.
My favorite part about camp has been the people.
Just because of how impactful it was for me. It really changed my life.
Camp definitely helped me get in my Bible more, like apply some of God's words in my life.
Whether you feel like you're a Christian or not, I feel like it's inviting either way.
It's just a great place to find the right people, lifelong friends, just people that can help you grow in a relationship with Jesus.
Well, hey, good morning, North Point. How are we doing? Nixa. I'm live in Nixa. Nixa, how are we doing? Okay, there we go. I'm not on the screen, folks. I'm not on the screen. I'm here in Nixa, but we are joining live with our 9 a.m. service in Republic and Springfield. Nixa, can you do me a favor and welcome Springfield and Republic to church this morning? Welcome to church. All right, we are in the Something in the Water series. We've been walking through this theme that God put in the Bible of every time he wants to do something new in his people's life, when he wants a fresh start, a new beginning, he takes people through the water. It happens throughout the Old Testament, and that's all a picture for us of water baptism, for why we do that today. If you're new to church and you see people getting water baptized, it's like, what's the deal with that? It's kind of weird, right? Like we dunk people in water, bring it back out. Seems like a strange tradition, but it's something that we didn't come up with in America in 2026. It's a long-standing tradition throughout the whole arc of the Bible. And so we'll be doing water baptisms next week across our campuses on Easter Sunday. And so we've been doing this Something in the Water series, just kind of lay that foundation. What do we do this for? And what is God doing in and around our lives? I think about these moments in life that I have. And I don't know if you ever had this moment where maybe you're stopped at a red light and you actually have like 17 seconds to be like alone by yourself. Or maybe you're trying to fall asleep and it's like just between you and your pillow, you have these kind of existential questions that creep into your mind. And sometimes they're unwanted. You're like, I don't want to think about that right now. So we change the subject, we move on, we just try to stay busy, so we have to think about certain things. But there's times you go through these moments where you have these questions that come in your mind. There's one question that comes in all of our minds at certain points that we don't want to deal with. And it's like, if you're like me, I'm just like, get busy, change the subject. But I remember these moments where you'll just be sitting at a red light and this question creeps into my mind every now and then. What am I doing with my life? And then I really hope the light turns green so I don't have to actually think about that. I can just keep going about what I'm doing. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, what am I doing? I'm going through the motions. You probably got a job, you got school, you got things going on. But like, what are you doing here? And there's times I start thinking about like, what am I actually doing with my life? And the reality is I have seasons in my life where I can answer that question pretty clearly. Like I feel like I've got a track and I know what I'm doing, but all of us hit these seasons and moments where if we're honest with ourselves, we're like, man, I don't know what I'm doing here. Anyone not know what they're doing with their life? I got two honest people in Nixa, Springfield, Republic. Everyone in Nixa's got it together apparently. What are you doing with your life? I remember I get those moments. I always go to certain people in my life. I go to have like the real talks about life. You got to have real people in your life. Mine's my dad. My dad is my Yoda. He's the guy I go to when I have like just those existential moments of like, what am I doing? Because I assume that he's got it all figured out. Certainly he must. I remember being in my early 20s and I was graduating high school. All my friends seemed to like have this life plan. They're in college doing this thing. And I was going to the University of New Mexico and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just kind of going through the motions. I hated college. My friends seemed to be on this track. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grow up. I still don't, still figuring that out. I remember talking to my dad. I was in my early 20s. He was probably in his early 50s. And my dad, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. And he kind of leaned in and he was like, yeah, man, me either. I'm like, dude, what? You're supposed, like, you have a mortgage. You have like a wife and kids and a dog. Like, you don't know what you're doing? I thought you just got to a point in life where you had it all figured out. I hit that point again in my early 30s. I was married and had two little kids. And like, that's a different kind of tired and busy when you got two kids in diapers and you're going through that whole thing. Some of y'all parents are in that stage right now and you're just got this fog in your eyes. You're sitting here church on a Sunday because it's the 1 hour a week where you don't have to be mom or dad. And so you're just like, whatever, man, say what you're going to say. I'm just happy to be here. Anyone in that bucket right now? Yeah, I see that hand. There's an honest person in Nixa. I remember those days where I'm just like, life's a blur. And things were good. Like I felt like I was accomplishing things in life, but I got to that point where again, I'm at the red light and I'm like, what am I doing? I had a job and the job was it just felt like a dead end job. And I was punching the clock and paying the bills and, there's food in the fridge, barely month to month, just making it. And it's like, I had all the things in the external that 22-year-old me would look at it and be like, you're winning, you're getting it. But I had this ache inside of me that knew that like, man, there's something, what am I missing? What am what am I doing? Is this really what it is? And so you get these points where your calendar is full, your life is full, but the rhythms of life are just slowly draining something inside of you that you just can't name. And there's that ache that's going on inside. I remember sitting down with my dad at 32 years old and asking the same question. And he just told me this. He's like, that ache is normal. That is normal. The question is, what will you do with it? What will you do with it? If we're all honest, we get these moments in life where we're not sure what we're doing, but I spent years and seasons of my life thinking that that feeling meant that something was wrong with me. But it turns out it meant something that was actually right. It meant that I was made for something beyond what I was living in that day. It was the ache, and if you put a name on it, the ache is called purpose. You have a purpose. You were made for something. And when you hit seasons and stages of your life where you know in your knower, you can't put your finger on it, but you know that the reality of your life is beneath the thing that God is calling you into, the ache of purpose begins to grow. And this might sound like a cheesy TED Talk thing to say on a Sunday, but the reality is true, is that God made you for a purpose. God made you for a reason. You're not human number 2,647,000,000 that just happened to spawn on the earth. Like God handcrafted you for a reason and a purpose and a mission, and it's our journey in life to figure out how do we get there. Ephesians 2:8-10 says it like this. Paul is writing in Ephesians and he says this, for by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works so that anyone can boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. That verse right there where it says workmanship, that word workmanship it's a craftsman term. It is a Greek, it's actually the work, it comes to the same word as poem. So it's like an author would write a poem. And a great poem has, the beginning ties to the end and the middle matters and there's rhythm and flow and balance to the whole thing. He says that you are his workmanship. He's a craftsman and he hand designed you. As an artist would paint a brush, as a potter would craft a wheel, as a great chef or cook would work in the kitchen and make something perfect, hands on the wheel, he made you. You didn't just happen. You were created and you were God's workmanship. And in Ephesians, it says you were his workmanship, created for good works. God made you for something and to go do something. And so we are his workmanship, and it is something that we have to walk into and realize, God, what did you make me for? So this series on something in the water, we've been talking about the power of salvation and the importance of taking that step of water baptism. There's something in the water, we've been saying. And we looked at the last couple of weeks that there's mercy in the water with the story of Noah's Ark, and there's freedom in the water as God took Moses and Israel through the Red Sea. And today we're gonna look at the story of Joshua crossing through the Jordan River to find our destiny in the water. Because God didn't just save you from something in your past. God has saved you for something in your future. God has something for you to step into, and you'll only find it by crossing through the water. So the story of Joshua crossing the Jordan River is where we're at today. If you've got your Bible, we're in Joshua chapter 1. We'll just be hanging out in the book of Joshua. If you don't have your Bible, if you go to the North Point Mo app, you can always follow along in the notes there. And as always, the Friendly Sky Bible will be behind me if you didn't have either of those things. I ever feel like a flight attendant, like just saying the same thing week to week? You're like, exits are here, 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 and here. No, just me? Okay. Perks of the job. So let's tell the story of Joshua crossing the Jordan River. If we get to Joshua and understand who he is, we'll get there in a minute, but I'm a big context guy. I always got to go back. I'm like, how did we get here? Like, I'm a context junkie. You ever meet somebody and you're like, why are you the way that you are? Or like, how did we get here? I always like to know, how did we get here? And so the how did we get here, the Joshua story, always goes back to Genesis and Adam. God created Adam and Eve in the garden. And if you ever want to know what is God's ideal for your life, you always go back to how did he start this thing? He makes Adam and Eve, and it says that he began to really work with them in the garden. There's this picture of the Garden of Eden where it says that Adam and Eve heard God walking in the cool of the day. Can you imagine that? Like God just walking, like you can hear his footsteps. It's a powerful picture. And so there's a story of God cooperating with Adam and Eve. So cooperating, like they're building it together. It says that God created the animals and then let Adam name them. Like we can just cruise past that scene, but I like to visualize it where God's just like, he's like, check this out. Giraffe, you know what I mean? Like crazy thing, long neck. And Adam's like, whoa, that's awesome. And God's like, what do you want to call it? He's like, giraffe, and it's like, all right, check it out. elephants, crazy nose, right? You know, and Adam is naming the animals as God is creating him. God is creating this garden, asking Adam to work it. So God's design for you is to co-work with you, to cooperate with you, to have you step into the thing that God is doing. So God is creating, but he doesn't want to do it by himself. He wants to invite you into his process of what he is doing on the earth. That thing is true in Genesis. It is true for you in 2026 in the Ozarks. God wants to invite you into this thing to cooperate with God. And so things go south from Adam and Eve in the garden, and you have this whole journey through the Old Testament of Moses freeing people from Egypt. They cross the Red Sea. We talked about that last week, and they go on this journey into their promise, just like you and I have to take a journey into God's promises for our life. God takes Moses and the Israelites through the desert into their promised land, and what should have been an 11-day journey ends up being a 40-year journey through the wilderness, and they've got to follow this cloud and eat manna and bread that's falling from the sky. It's a wild story. You should read it. But as time goes on, every day begins the same. It's 40 days of the same old thing. Manna's fallen from the sky. They follow the cloud, and they're going through this wilderness journey, and it starts to feel like Bill Murray and Groundhog Day, where like every day is the same. If you're not as old as me, you don't get that reference. You don't need to. If you're older than me, Groundhog Day, what a classic. They don't make them like that anymore. Every day feels the same in the wilderness. You're going through the motions, and maybe your life feels like that today, where you're just kind of going through the motions. You know that guy at work on Monday, you're like, hey, how you doing, man? How's your weekend? Well, it's good. Still here, punching the clock. It's like, dude, really? But like we get in that stage where we're just going through the motions. And so they get all the way through this journey, and they get to the banks of the Jordan River where they're about to step into their promised land, and the tension is growing, the vision is growing. They see on the other side of that river finally is the thing that God has made us to occupy and walk into. And the story goes that Moses, their leader, dies, and Joshua becomes the new leader of the nation of Israel. So Joshua steps up as the new leader. Got this nation of Israel, a couple million people behind them. They've been wandering for 40 years, and they're on the precipice of stepping into their destiny. The only problem is between them and their destiny is the Jordan River. And so Joshua chapter 1, that's where we're at. The year is 1406 BC for my historian friends. That's a long time ago. 1406 BC, we're at the banks of the Jordan River, Joshua 1, 8, and 9. God is giving his command to Joshua right now, and so he's telling Joshua how to get ready to cross into his river, and there's things we can learn as we get ready to cross into ours. It says this, the book of the law, Joshua, shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Powerful verse. It's like, meditate on my law, know my ways, know my truth, and then where you go, I'll go with you. Wandering the wilderness was about just wake up and do what I tell you to do every day. Wake up and do what I tell you to do every day. He comes to Joshua and says, wake up, meditate on my laws, know my ways, get to know how God thinks about things, get to know how I move about things. And then Joshua says, wherever you go, I will go with you, and you're gonna have great success. I read those, and sometimes these Bible verses sound like fortune cookies. It's like, you will have great success. You know, I'm like, who talks like that? Do this, you'll have great success. And sometimes we begin to think about God like this cosmic, like vending machine thing. And so I would say it like this, God is he's not a vending machine, but he is a promise keeper. He is a promise keeper. God does make promises, and he's got promises over your life. Some of them are general promises that you find in the scriptures. Things like in the New Testament would say that God has not given you a spirit of fear, but he has given you a spirit of power and love and a sound mind. Some of you are not operating in a sound mind right now. Your mind is chaotic, it's crazy, but there's actually a promise of God that you can have a sound mind. That's a general promise from God that's there, and he is a promise keeper. The thing is, we got to be like Joshua, begin to cross into and contend in faith for the promises over our lives. Some of you have promises in your life that are specific, where you believe you had seasons and moments with God 10, 15, 20 years ago, where God put a promise in your heart about your future that you haven't seen yet. And you know in your knower it was God, but you haven't seen it yet. Our God is a promise keeper. He's not a vending machine, but he's a promise keeper, and it's our job to contend in faith for the promises that God has. And what God is telling Joshua is that if you will get to know me, if you'll spend time, meditate on my word, be careful to walk in my ways, then I'm gonna make your way prosperous, and you will have great success. I want God's blessing on my life. I want his favor on my life. I want his success on my life and his prosperity on my life. This isn't name it and claim it like nonsense, like televangelist stuff. I want God's promise though. Like I want it on my life. And he says, if you'll know my ways, then where you go, I'll go and you'll find success. And so again, with Moses, it's do what I say. With Joshua, it's think how I think. This is an elevation, a maturity that happens, and every parent wants this for their own kid. When your kids are little, you got to do everything for them. I was talking to my friend Kendrick in Springfield last weekend, and he's got 3 kids under the age of 5, and that's a special kind of tired. Y'all know what I mean? It's like you got to do everything, make every meal. The pile of laundry when your kids are little is insane because the amount of articles of clothing that can fit in one load of laundry when their clothes are small. Y'all know what I'm talking about? It's that mountain of laundry that just takes forever to get through. He's a special kind of tired right now, but I was kind of giving him encouragement, like, hey man, there's gonna be a certain day where you're just gonna say, hey kids, get in the car. And they're just gonna do it. Right now he's got the car seats. Dads, you know what I'm talking about? That weird muscle you build right here with the baby carrier. There's one right there, right? Where it's like, you got to do everything when they're little, but as your kids grow, the goal is they begin to do things for themselves. And the magic is when they get to this age, they begin to think for themselves and they begin to make decisions and they begin to think how you think. And you're watching them actually make good decisions independently of you. Some of y'all parents are like, really? That's going to happen? Believe it. It's a promise. Take it. Sorry, I have a weird Southern Baptist, evangelist alter ego that I slipped into every now and then. Promises of God. The goal is that you grow in God and go from just doing what he tells you to do. That's obedience, that's good. But God is inviting Joshua and he's inviting you to say, hey, think how I think. See it how I see it. And then begin to go where you go. And I'm going to go with you. Game changer in your faith when you begin to move and to know God and operate in his ways. I put in your notes like this. If you be who God calls you to be, you'll end up doing what God has made you to do. Most of us fight that question all day long, and we battle on the second half of that question of, God, what do you want me to do? What are you asking me to do? Anyone ever been frustrated with God because he just won't tell you what to do? God, what do you want me to do? I'll do it. God is almost always operating in who he's calling you to be. He's telling Joshua, be a person who hangs out with me, who knows my ways, who knows my thoughts, who meditates, begins to think how I operate, how I do things. And if you'll be the person that God is calling you to be, you will almost always end up walking into the destiny, into the promise that God has called you to do. But the fruit of the thing is God is shaping your character. He is shaping your heart. He is shaping how you think, how you see things, so that you begin to operate in a day-to-day rhythm that functions within the blessing that God has for you. When you begin to think like he thinks and see the things that he sees, and you begin to move in his directions relationally, all of a sudden you wake up one day 5, 10, 15 years later and you're walking in the promise that God had from you from a young age. It happens to all of us where we get paralyzed of what should I do thing, but God is almost always calling us to be who you're supposed to be. If you will farm into that field, I can promise you, you will wake up 10 years from now doing the thing that God has called you to do. So Joshua 1, we're prepping to go into the river. In Joshua 3, Joshua goes back to the people and has this whole section on consecration. So if we're going to go in and conquer this land and we're going to step into God's promise, there's this concept of consecration before conquest here. In Joshua 3:5, Joshua comes back to the people and says this, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. For many of us, the wonders that God has for us tomorrow are precedented by the consecration that we have today. What is the thing that God is calling you to consecrate today? That word consecration, not one we use a lot these days, but if you go into the original language, it means to be set apart, to be removed from common use, to be considered holy. It's to be uncommon. What is common in and around you that God is calling you to be uncommon in? And what are the things that you need to set down, lay down before you step into the thing that God has for you? What do you need to let go of in order to go where God is calling you to go? Is it habits? Maybe you've got some habits that you know in your knower, man, I got to drop that habit. If I'm going to be the person that God has called me to be, that type of person doesn't have habits like that. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Where it's like sometimes you got to focus in on when I want to be a great dad, I have to ask myself in moments like, hey, what would a great dad do right now? Because Drew doesn't feel like being a great dad in this moment. Y'all ever, anyone else honest? You just don't feel like being the guy you know you're called to be or the gal you're called to be. And you got to ask yourself, if you're a people leader, business owners in the room, there's times when you do not feel like being a good leader to the people of your team at work because frankly, they don't deserve it. Bunch of ungrateful, they have no idea how much sleep you lost. You know what I mean? They don't, they're cashing the checks that you're signing and you're like, you don't know what it costs me to do this, the sacrifices I'm making for this thing. I don't feel that, right? I got an amen. Amen here in Nixa. I appreciate honesty levels going up here in Nixa. Just we're working the field, working the field. You don't feel like being a good leader in those moments. But those moments that God was like, hey, what would a great leader do in this moment? And you got to step into your calling in that moment and be the person that God has called you to be before you end up doing the thing that God has called you to be. You got to set aside that thing. You got to set aside the right to be right sometimes. You got to set aside the right to have a bad attitude some days. How many parents know you can't just walk in and have a bad attitude around your family sometimes because that thing's contagious. You put down the right to have a bad attitude. What is the thing that you got to set down? Is it a financial obligation that you need to set down? Is it a distraction? What is impacting your devotion to God that is setting you back from stepping into the thing that God has called you to go? Consecrate yourself, it says. It doesn't say that God's going to consecrate you. His call to the people is, hey, consecrate yourself, which means that God's not going to do it for you. There's certain things I found in life that God just won't do for me. God has never set my alarm clock for me. Maybe he's like, maybe you're tighter with him than I am, but I've never had a magical alarm clock go off that the Lord is like, oh, arise to your Tuesday, Drew. No, I gotta make a decision and consecrate myself. I gotta say, hey, I'm gonna set down sleeping in because I wanna go after the thing God has for me. Sometimes the dream is always gonna require a consecration. Your destiny is consecration on the other side. My Bible has never floated across the room and landed on my lap in the morning. It's never happened. It's never been like, oh, thanks, God. It don't happen. Consecrate yourself. What is the thing that you need to set in place to get there? And a lot of times these things we got to consecrate. It's not sin, but it's not wise. We ask this question sometimes. I think about it. It's not sinful, but it's unwise. We talk about avoiding sin sometimes more than pursuing God. And avoiding sin is good. Yeah, do that. But pursue God. If you pursue God, these things will come to light. Immaturity asks this, is it right or is it wrong? But maturity will ask this different question. It'll ask, is this wise? Is it wise? When you're new in your faith or just immature in general, it's like, well, is it right or is it wrong? Because what you're asking for is what's the least I have to do to still be good? What's the most I can get away with and not be in trouble? Where's the lowest common denominator, right? What's the least I got to do to blend in? But when God starts getting a hold of your life and you start to want to pursue the promises God has for you, you begin to see a vision for your life that God has for you to say, wait a minute, this might not be wrong, but it's not wise. You know what I'm talking about? Like, it ain't wrong, but it ain't wise. You could get away with it if you want to stay in the wilderness eating manna every day. But if you want to cross into the thing that God has for you, you got to start asking questions a little bit differently, saying, well, God, is this wise? Is this what you want? Does this align with your ways, with your thinking? And you begin to align yourself to God's best vision for your life as opposed to settling for the lowest common denominator of what you can get away with. Because if you don't consecrate yourself, you can ultimately just live a lowest common denominator version of your life and wake up 20 years from now saying, God, did I miss it? That's a haunting question that we ask, but the good news is this, it's never too late to reconsecrate yourself and step into the thing that God has for you. We're gonna continue in the story. I'm still learning how to manage my time as a preacher and figuring out, like, I got timestamps on my notes to figure out like how I end on time. Like when I go along, all the kids workers are like gonna riot over there across the hallway. So I'm learning like what makes the cut and what doesn't in the notes. And so there's this whole section after this where to consecrate themselves, Joshua actually, if you read through, he ends up circumcising all of the adult like males on the other side of the river as part of this consecration process. And there's these fascinating details about like how that whole process works and like what God was doing. So I was gonna elaborate on that whole circumcision thing, but it didn't make the cut. Yeah? Okay. All right. I'm still learning the lines here at North Point. I'm learning the lines. Saturday night it flew. It was like Sunday morning. They might all get up and walk out. If you didn't get that joke, ask someone next to you later, make a nice little post-service conversation in the lobby. What do they mean by that? Let's keep moving. Joshua chapter 3, Republic Springfield. I don't know if that was offensive to you, but in Christian County, somehow that's acceptable. Joshua 3, what version of your life exists on the other side? And so the instructions come to Joshua on how to actually cross the river. And the first instruction is this, he says, get the priests with the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulders and step into the water. And so God doesn't tell them to build a bridge. He doesn't even know how God's gonna do this. But he tells the priests to get the Ark of the Covenant and step into the water. If you go back to when they crossed the Red Sea, we talked about it last week. They had just run from Egypt. There's enemies chasing them. They're up against the wall. And they just pray. And like Moses extends the staff and the Red Sea splits open and they just walk into it. On this one, I imagine these people, it was their parents' generation that walked through the Red Sea. They're sitting there being like, is God gonna do it? Is God gonna open the water so we can walk through? They're probably, how's this gonna work? But the command this time, as they've grown in their maturity, is not sit back and watch God do something for you while you're on your lazy boy. It's you step in and you get your feet wet. God calls them into the Jordan River. They have to step into the Jordan River. And so it says this in Joshua 3:15 and 16. As soon as those bearing the ark, which is the presence of God, the presence of God lives in that ark. As soon as they're carrying the ark, they'd come as far as the Jordan. And the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water. It says, now the Jordan overflows all of its banks for this time of the harvest. So it was a flood stage. And the waters coming down from above stood up and rose up in a heap very, very far away at a town called Adam. And the people passed over on the opposite side of Jericho. It's a miles-long stretch of the Jordan River. It says the presence of God, so the man named Joshua leads people. The presence of God gets in the water. They get their feet wet, and it says the water heaped up at a town called Adam. And then millions of people cross over the Jordan River. There's always these things in the Bible that God is signaling and showing about the future. This is 1406 BC. Joshua's name, if you go back in Hebrew, it's the same root name as that you would get the name Jesus. It's Joshua, Yeshua. And he has the presence of God on the arks of the priests that steps in the water, and the water backs up to a town called Adam. We've been talking about this concept of water baptism, how in Romans 5 and 6 it says there's a new life, a new birth that happens. We die to the old. It says that sin and death came through one man, Adam, but through another man, Jesus, came life and resurrection and peace. We're celebrating that resurrection next week. There's a whole picture of it stopped at Adam, God's plan, but God's plan begins to reinvent your life through a man whose name means Jesus, who steps into the banks of the Jordan River, the presence of God, and leads people through the Jordan River onto the other side of their destiny. So when Jesus comes in Luke and gets baptized in the Jordan River, you have another man named Jesus coming back, stepping into that exact same Jordan River 1,400 years later to free you and I from the sin that we got that started back at Adam. And he's painting this entire new picture of what does it mean to be free in Jesus. Your sin nature is changed. God no longer identifies you by your failures. There is a power of a resurrected life that Jesus is modeling when he steps back into that same Jordan River. God is painting this picture of a man named Jesus walking into a river 1,400 years earlier with the presence of God to stop what Adam started, to give you and I a fresh day, a fresh start, and a new birth by stepping into the waters. It is this powerful picture that God is painting through this, and he's always weaving things together. And so there's this vision that God is restoring that thing back from the Garden of Eden to be able to cooperate with God, to be able to go where he's called you to go. Jesus would call it his kingdom, where we are extending his kingdom, where we come all the way back to what Adam lost. Adam had the ability to cooperate with God where he put him, to name the animals, to work with God and do what God wanted to do in the garden. And so when we pass through the waters of baptism, it's not just being saved from our past, it's being saved for something. To answer the call to your purpose is to step out of that water and to begin to cooperate with God where he has called you to go. There is a version of your life that you'll only experience when you follow Jesus through the water. And on the other side is you cooperating with him, doing what he wants to do in Republic, in Springfield, here in Nixa. God has called you to be a cooperator with him. I can't go where you go to school. I can't go into your home. I can't go into your work, but God has redeemed you to be the person that would cooperate with him where you go on Monday mornings. I don't know what your world looks like outside of your time here at North Point Church, but God has redeemed you and restored you, not just to take up space and like suck air. Like when we get saved, we don't just get like vacuum sucked up into heaven, like, you know what I mean? Like God leaves us here to go do something for him. And that is the purpose that ultimately you and I are saved into. And it's modeled when we walk through the water. There's a land with your name on it. There are people that only you can reach. There's a version of your marriage, of your family, of your life that only you can initiate and begin to restore. And it happens by passing through the water. Again, in the Old Testament, they were able to sit back and watch what God would do. But in the New Testament, or in the Joshua story, as Joshua steps in, the miracle is triggered by their obedience. He says, I want to call you into something else. We're not just running from your past. I want you to step into your future. And it was that first step of obedience that triggered the miracle of a new life for people. There's a first step into the water that believers we take. We say yes to Jesus, and then we step into the water and we follow him, not just away from our past, but into our future, into our destiny, into our purpose. So there's two heart changes that happen on the other side of the river. There's two heart changes that happen in the middle of the water. The story goes on, Joshua 5, they cross through the water. They go on and they take the land, and that's a whole nother series of stories through Joshua, but this passing through the river happens, and our equivalent of that is when we decide to make that decision to get water baptism. So I want to talk about two changes that happen in the rivers of baptism. The first one is this, is from God's will for my life to my life for God's will. I stole this from another preacher, but we often ask this first question, God, what's your will for my life? Anyone ever ask that question? God, what's your will for my life? What's your will for my life? The orientation of that is it's my life, God, and what do you want me to do with it? When we say yes to Jesus, ultimately what we're saying is it's not my life anymore. God, my life is actually about your will. My life belongs to you. So God, the phrasing of it is just a quick change of words, but it's a completely different philosophy for how you approach the will of God and your purpose in life. It changes to God, how do I lay down my life for your will? There's a difference there between God, what do you want me to do, versus God, I'm gonna lay my life down for what you want. One makes you the star of the show and makes your life about you, but saying yes to Jesus, ultimately, it's a decision to say, my life's actually not about me anymore. I'm not the main star of the show. I'm not the main character of the movie. Like when the credits roll, like my name's not on top. The star of the show is Jesus, and the whole story of my life is what he did, not what I'm doing. And when we begin to orient around that, that's like almost like an American idea for us to think, wait a minute, like it's not about me? No, it's actually not. And there's freedom in that. It's actually not about you. And for some of you, that's like offensive, but for some of you, you're gonna feel the weight come off you and realize it's actually not about you. It's about him. And I'm gonna set my life down and step into the river and say, God, how can I lay my life down for your will? Jesus is not asking to be a side thing to you. He's not asking to ride shotgun in your car. He's not just a side piece. He's not a situationship, as the kids would say. Like, he wants to be the only thing, the main thing. Your life is ultimately about him. And so what happens when you step into that, you begin to co-work with him again. God, what do you see? You're gonna walk into your office Monday morning, and instead of seeing what you see and feeling your frustrations, you're gonna walk in and say, God, what do you see? When you clock in, when you badge in, when you get on that Zoom call, you begin to see that whole world differently and say, God, what do you see? God, what are you hearing? And then you ask this question, God, what would you say? And when you begin to step into that, you step into that same promise to Joshua that says, know my ways, know my commands, and in that you're gonna find great success. And you walk back into that office, back into that home, back into that school, with a completely different mindset that says, God, what are you seeing here? What are you hearing? And what do you wanna say? Because I wanna cooperate with you and be the person in my school, in my work, in my family that's saying what God would say. That's doing what God would do. That's seeing people the way God sees them and then responding with a heart of love and compassion towards them. The other heart change that happens goes simply from this, from wandering without purpose to fighting forward in your promise. From wandering without purpose to fighting forward into your promise. I know I've met a lot of people, especially in the last 4 or 5 months, a lot of names, a lot of faces. I've yet to meet anyone who's just wandered into their promise. Someone who's just drifted into their destiny. When you spend life wandering, you end up with the ache. But when you spend time on purpose, on mission, saying, God, I want to lay my life down for your cause, for your mission, you begin to step into a promise. There's a verse in Luke 7:30 that I think is kind of a wild one. There's every now and then you read that and you're like, wait, what did that say? Jesus is having this whole dialogue with a crowd of people around water baptism and talking about John the Baptist and the whole importance of it. And in the middle of that dialogue, there's this little aside, there's these scribes and the Pharisees and the lawyers who are the ones who looked good on the outside. They had their acts together externally, but internally they'd grown cold towards God. And there's this verse in there in Luke 7:30 that says this, but the Pharisees and the lawyers rejected the purpose of God for themselves. How? Having not been baptized by him. What? There's a purpose of God for your life. And we talk about the act of water baptism, but there's a purpose of God for your life, and there's a heart change that happens. There's something we're doing in that space that allows you to step into the purpose that God has for your life, because it's not just this ritual we do. It's a moment where God stirs your heart. Don't ever do it out of pressure because your parents told you to do it. Do it when God moves your heart to step into that first act of obedience. But when you submit your life to him and come out, I'm gonna say, I'm dead to the old, I'm alive to the new, I'm gonna walk in God's purpose for my life. there's this obedience thing that happens with God. You begin to walk in his ways, that the ache of the purposeless and the ache of the what am I doing with my life begins to vanish because you realize it's not my life. I'm partnering with him, doing the thing that he's doing, and you won't find more fulfillment in life than partnering with God. I'll close with a story. There's a North Pointer I talked to in the last couple of weeks. His name is Dan. Dan grew up in church. Typical kind of Midwest Bible Belt story. He's like, man, I just grew up in church. Like I thought like being a Christian was like the only option growing up. It's like, we were just church people. We went to church is what we did. He was like, I couldn't really point back to a time when I actually said yes and became a Christian. It's culturally what I grew up in. My family went to church. We were just Christian people. My friends were Christian friends. We were just what we did. We were church people. He's like, but I can't think back to a time where I really like made a decision to like follow Jesus. He's like, I think I was baptized at a really young age, but it wasn't like my decision. It was just culturally what we did. Like in my family, we all got like baptized. And so he's just living life. Dan's, probably in his mid-50s now. And he was like, I was showing up for my wife and my kids, but something was off. I had patterns in my life I couldn't explain. I had just habits in my life, some stuff going on that nobody knew about, that I wasn't proud of. I just had stuff going on in my life that I wasn't proud of. I had reactions to my family that weren't healthy and weren't right. I couldn't really put my finger on like what was the thing. And so he said, I almost had a limp, is the way he described it. He's like, I was limping on the inside. And he's like, when your back's hurt and you're kind of just walking weird to compensate for it, and like you don't even realize you're walking weird anymore? He's like, I had developed a limp around some things in my heart that were not right, and I needed to do some work to figure it out. And so it's like people would ask me how you're doing. He would always say, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. Most dudes especially know that I'm fine is code words for I don't want to talk about how I'm doing. Move along. And he said this and it stuck with me. He's like, but Drew, man, I had to realize there's a big difference between I'm fine and I'm free. God began to work in his heart over a season of time, and he kind of told his story. He's like, man, God just started to move my heart in different ways, and I get to tell God is working on the inside. Sometimes the discomfort you're feeling doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It means God is working on you. Lean into it. Don't run from it. He's like, God is working on the inside of me, and ultimately, he's like, it became clear to me that like my next step was water baptism. He was working with a Christian counselor, trying to unpack some stuff too, and he's like, man, there's a time for me. I need to move on from the old and say yes to Jesus in a way that I never had. He's like, I became sort of a cultural Christian, but I don't know that I had a moment that I could look back to and say, that was the day. So God was stirring in his heart to be water baptized. He was ready to mean something. He's like, I needed to leave something in the water, that story that many of us have heard. If you haven't heard the story, just listen to some Carrie Underwood. She'll tell you too. He's like, I came out of that water lighter and free. Then he said this. He's like, Drew, the version of my family and my life is completely different from before and after that day because something in me broke off in the water. At North Point, we believe everyone's got a next step. God's always moving us forward. None of us have arrived yet. I don't care like how Christian you look on Sundays. You got a next step. We're all a work in progress, right? God is always working. So we'll talk about next steps. So maybe you're here today and like Dan, you don't have a memory of a baptism moment, no date, no memory, no moment that's yours. And as we've gone through the last couple of weeks, you're like, man, God's working on me. That's a good thing. God's always working on us. Just to remind you, like one of the first things Jesus asked his followers to do is to be water baptized. It's the first thing and the last thing he tells us to do. It's a reorientation of your life. It's a recommitment to say, wait, I'm going to cooperate with God. I want to live a lifestyle that's his, where I'm going to co-work with God to bring this thing to life, to work the way he works, to bring his kingdom to life in and around me, and lay my life down and bury the old and come up new. So maybe you've normalized some limps like Dan has, and maybe it's time to take that next step. And we talk about water baptism. We're doing it next weekend. You can sign up in the app or fill out the connection card. We'll connect with you and get that scheduled. But we're going to have the tanks. We'll be baptizing people next weekend. And to be real, like there's nothing special about the water in the tank. It's just hose water from the back of the building. But when that water mixes with your faith, because God's doing something in you, something happens in the water. We've talked about the last 3 weeks. There's mercy in the water. There's freedom in the water. There's destiny in the water. It's a pattern that God laid out throughout all of the scriptures. Of when you pass through the water, something happens. And maybe, like Dan, there's a different version of your family, different version of your life, different version of your relationships that you'll only find on the other side of the water. Maybe you're here today, you're a follower of Jesus and you're standing at the banks of a different promised land. There's something in you, there's a promise you're in front of right now that you're waiting for God to open the Red Sea, but in this season, he's actually asking you to take a step. That might look like returning a phone call, returning a message, starting a business, making a call. What is the thing in your life you're on the precipice of your promise and you're scared? God told Joshua, be strong and courageous. I'm going to go with you. I encourage you, if you're in that place right now, be the person God has made you to be, and then get up tomorrow and go do the thing that God is calling you to do. He wants to cooperate with you in that thing. Maybe you're here today and you've been hanging around church for a while. You've been circling the runway on this whole Jesus thing. You know, we have a lot of people that come in out of North Point services that would say, hey, I'm still just checking this thing out. I'm coming to church, I'm interested, but I have not made a commitment to follow Jesus. And I always call it circling the runway. You're thinking about it. You're like, permission to land, I don't know. Today's a great day to make that decision. There's a couple ways you can do that. You can do it on the connection card. If you're like, hey, I just want to talk to somebody about this, fill out the connection card. We don't call it an information card. We call it a connection card because we actually want to connect with you. If you fill that card out and say, I want to make a decision to follow Jesus, or you just want to talk about it, fill that card out as you walk out on all of our campuses. There'll be buckets in the back. Drop it in. We'll reach out to you this week. The other way you can make that decision is we have, across all of our campuses, we have a prayer team that hangs out up front after service is over. They got a little purple lanyard on. Nicest people you're going to meet. They just love God. They love you. They'd be willing to pray with you right here today, here and now, to make that decision that for the first time to find and follow Jesus. That group is also around too. If you just need prayer today for something where you're like, hey, I got something going on, you can always do prayer requests and drop them in the bucket, but we would love to pray with you today as well. Hang out after service. We'll just love to pray with you real simple. Not gonna make a big deal about it. We just wanna actually be a human to human connection. A big church, you can get lost a little bit too easily. And so it's an opportunity for us to connect with people on a human to human level. We would love to pray with you if you can. I'm gonna ask everyone across our campuses, if you guys wanna stand. I'm actually taking this thing all the way to the finish line today. No announcements after me. So Republic, Springfield, if you guys want to stand up, I would just love to pray with you and dismiss our service. Let me pray for you real quick. God, I thank you for the people of North Point. God, I thank you for every family represented, every business, God, every school. God, I just thank you that you have called this people into this community to be arrows out to make a difference in what you're doing in our community. God, I pray your blessing over them, your favor over them. And God, as we go into Easter week, God, I pray that your presence would just rest especially unique and heavy and peacefully in and on their homes. God, I pray your blessing over them. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, we appreciate you guys. Love you guys. See you next week. If you need prayer, come forward.